concentrating on tucking brushes in wood.
I have. Let's hear.
Where's your brush?
They're at the store.
You
Don't do
I'm serious. This is my conduct.
it again.
Live and direct.
All right.
Kicking it old school.
Yeah.
Hi, James. Have I met you before? I know we've talked on text and stuff, but.
Yep. Only through text.
And
So.
this is actually Adam's doppelganger. It looks exactly like him, but nothing like him at the same time.
Unfortunately, yeah, I may think like him a time or two as well. So.
Right. That's super funny. Rock and roll.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm just kind of filling in for him. He had a busy day, so.
Right. No worries at all. Actually, it works out because we had talked about wet blending in our very first lesson, and Adam kind of did it, but I couldn't demo it because nobody could see me. The way we did the thing, it wasn't on Zoom. So yeah, this time maybe we can do that, and hopefully you'll get a little idea of kind of how to do that type of thing.
Cool.
What kind of background do you have in miniature painting? Like, is this your first model or?
No, it's not my first model.
Okay.
I've painted up an army. I'm like at the kind of Adam's kind of taught me the basics for like speed painting and good speed painting, but I'm definitely not putting out stuff that he is, and certainly not stuff that you are. So.
Right. So I mean, you've got paint on models, but you're obviously learning in the learning curve or whatever.
Yep.
We all came from somewhere. My first models were horrific, so it works out.
Cool.
I think a lot of people just, they look at, the latest, greatest, or the newest thing you've done, and they're like, whoa, it's always been this way, But
Yeah.
it definitely has not. And I'm still learning. That's the cool thing about miniature painting is there's always something to learn. There's always a new technique or a new style that's cool. And just when you think there's nothing new under the sun, all of a sudden something new pops up and you're like, I never saw that coming. So one thing that I have found that has helped me tremendously in the last few years is just base coating models, like how to base coat them efficiently. And wet blending is one of those things. When I started, like now there's YouTubes, there's Patreons, there's like all this opportunity to learn miniature painting. So it's really nice actually. But when I started, there was none of that. There was a few YouTube videos and stuff, but so everything like was based off of myth. Like this, wet blending was this mythical creature that, was just like, well, in theory, it's pretty cool, but, you try it and it doesn't work. And so I went about, over the years, I just kept trying, working at it. And sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. And I started figuring out why it worked and why it didn't. And so I'm going to share with you all that stuff right now. And then hopefully you don't have to spend 7 years of your life trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And
I like
granted, that was later in my painting career. That was 7 years after I already knew how to paint, so it wasn't like I was just like, brand new. It would have taken even longer.
Wow.
So that's what I love about teaching and just the learning process is if someone's willing to talk to you about something, it's just great because it saves you a crap ton of time, like just tons of time. So we'll kind of start with that. I see you've got a big demon, which will actually be pretty good because it's got a big areas to paint in. You didn't happen to grab like just a blank base, did you? If you don't have it, it's okay. I'm going to use it as like a sort of a teaching thing. I've got my base right here. It's just a flat base. There's nothing special about it. It's just to kind of show you a blend across of it. The other thing that I'm going to show you is brushes. So I don't know what kind of brushes you have there, but I'm sure Adam has 18 of everything.
Right.
And Adam, he doesn't clean any of his stuff. I'm sure they're all just dirty. And no, I'm just kidding. So there's different kinds of brushes. When I started, it was all about the synthetic brushes, the nylon brushes that you get at the hobby store. Games and Gears makes brushes. A lot of companies make those. You've got these number 8 hobby brushes that you can get from Hobby Lobby. You know, they're just basic nylon brushes, and that's what I think everybody starts with. Somewhere along the line, you upgrade to a Klinsky Sable brush. So I've got here a Winsor Newton Series 7, and then also an Artist Opus brush. And these brushes are like the elite brushes. You know, the Klinsky Sables are the ones like that you like you're supposed to use. You know, if you're a cool painter, you use Klinsky Sables. And one thing about them is they're very precise. The tip on them can hold a really fine point, and that's awesome. But quite honestly, for what we're doing, a nylon brush is actually the best brush you can use. And I'm sure people are losing their mind right now. Just a regular nylon brush, so like a hobby brush, not an actual Klinsky Sable. So I think does Adam have all the Games Workshop ones there, or what brushes are those?
Yeah, there's definitely plenty of Citadel. There's also a plethora of
just random stuff.
that I'm not too familiar with. So.
Okay. So if they're Klinsky Sable, they'll say Klinsky Sable on the brush itself. Otherwise, it's probably a nylon brush. And nylon's what you want to use in base coating situations. And I use nylon brushes on high-end paint jobs as well as gaming paint jobs. It doesn't matter. And the reason why I like them better is they put paint down more evenly. So like the Klinsky Sable brushes put paint down very precisely, but oftentimes it'll be a little blotchy. I don't know why it does that, but it does. And so the paint doesn't come off the brush as evenly as it does off of a nylon brush. So that being said, you can get away with a much cleaner base coat with a nylon brush. So like one base coat as opposed to 2 or 3 with the Klinsky Sable. So that being said, I would recommend using the nylon brushes for this. Okay. Now, let's talk about our paints a little bit. You may or may not have noticed, I didn't start paying attention to my paint and stuff like that till like probably 5 or 6 years into painting. So like before that, it was just like, you know, everything was on a wing and a prayer, you know, like I would just paint and whatever happened, and I didn't know why. But when I started paying attention to my paint, I realized that some paints, there's different bases that these paints are like, that the pigment's mixed into. And every pigment is different. There's some synthetic ones, there's some natural pigments, there's all kinds of different pigments, you know. And they need different chemical bases to go into to work properly. So some of them are thinner and some of them are thicker. When you're wet blending, you want to go with thicker paints. So perfect example is these 2 Citadel paints, Fenrisian Gray and the Fang, which a lot of people use for Space Wars. If you open them up, they just look thick. Like it's a thicker glob of paint. This is the type of paint you're looking for. An example of a thinner paint would be almost every single red you've ever used, or yellows. Yellows are always a very thin base, you know, consistency. And so the thicker the paint, the easier it is to wet blend. And you'll see where that works in here in a minute when I start demoing this. But so if you just pay attention to your paints a little bit, you can kind of tell right off the bat if they seem a little thicker or thinner. And you want to choose thicker paints. Wash out my brush there. The other thing is that I do is I don't thin my paints. I won't say I never thin my paints, because obviously you can thin paints, but I tend not to thin my paints when I'm wet blending. And the reason for that is I want the paint thicker, right? So if I grab some of this Fang color right here, it's on my wet palette, but my wet palette, I'm using a parchment paper, so it shouldn't be letting water in without my permission. I only put water in if I need it. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that paint, and I'm just going to show you real quick on this base, just to kind of give you an idea of how the wet blend works. Now, there's a couple things that you need to know. Basically, where it's going to blend, I want very little paint. So if I start my wet blend up at the top with a little bit more paint, I can put it on right there on the edge. Actually, let me zoom in here a little bit closer. I'm gonna grab a little bit of paint. So what I'm hoping to have happen is as I put the paint on,
Oh wow.
notice I start running out of paint. There's less paint right here in the middle than at the start. So if I turn it around and grab my lighter color, go the other way, as I start running out of paint is right about the area where the two colors meet. And I get a really good blend.
Yeah.
Now, I'll probably have to put a second coat on this because it's a little bit see-through right there. Well, also I started with a black base coat, so it's going to have some black shine through. But you can see my blend is really good. Now, that being said, when I've been doing this a long time, so a lot of times my blends will come out perfectly the first try. But when I started, it didn't always work that way. So a couple reasons why your blends won't be good is A, your paint's too wet, like you have too much water in it, or B, you have simply too much paint. I should have been more prepared. I should have had two bases. What was I thinking? Let's see here.
I actually just got one too, so I can.
Yeah. So I'm going to just grab this other base that I had on the other table, and I'm going to show you what happens if I put the two colors in. If I do this wet blend without running out of paint, where my blend is supposed to be. So I'm just going to start right here with the big old blob of this, and then I'll flip it around, and I'm going to grab a big old blob of the Fenrisian gray, and I'll put it right next to that color. And as I move it in, the problem is there's so much paint, it's not really blending, it's just moving the color around itself. And so it's almost impossible to blend it good. Now, if I wanted kind of a texture blend, that's pretty cool. But it's very hard to control this blend if there's too much paint. So that's really the key, is learning how to control how much paint is on your brush and making sure that it starts running out, like you're physically running out of paint when you get to the portion where you're going to start blending. So if I want to reinforce this color on this base, try it again. Now this is kind of ridiculous because I don't think you'd ever have this big of a blend on anything you do, but for practicing it works really well. So I'm going to start again, back and forth. Notice I never pick my brush up. If you pick your brush up, it ruins the blend. So, and then I'll go the other way, my lighter color. And I notice when I do it, my lighter color runs out really quick. So I'm just actually going to add some more. And you'll find I'm going kind of quick brush strokes, but that's actually a pretty good blend. I'm going kind of quick brush strokes, but usually it's a little bit slower brush stroke really helps facilitate that blend better. Like it allows the colors to mix right on your model. I'm going to try it on this base again, just to show you. And a lot of times I do short little sweeps or a little circular pattern. Go with the other color, back the other way. The trick here is you got to move quick, because if you don't, the paint starts drying. You can't wet blend with dry paint. It just doesn't work.
How much paint are you putting on your brush? Like, is it?
Not tons. So let me switch to my palette cam. See if I can't. Let me see if I can actually get closer. Oops. I don't want to make the Knights logo closer. Send it back. Okay. Now I'll do this one. Bring it closer. So one of the things that I do when I'm grabbing my paint, like I grab into the little pool of paint here, and a lot of times I'll sort of flatten my brush on the palette like that and pull it out from the paint itself. So basically what I'm doing is I'm loading my brush with that thick paint and then squeezing it all out, or most of it out. So I just have a very thin amount of paint. This is how I kind of control how much paint's on my brush. And then obviously sometimes, like on the bases, I needed more paint. So I'll just grab a little bit right on the tip of a little bit more paint. So you can't really see it in that picture. Let me switch back to my other camera.
Oh, cool.
So I've loaded it, and then you can just kind of see it's a little bit more paint on the tip than back in the barrel of the brush. Now another thing that you'll notice when I'm painting, I always start, like I have a really light touch. It's almost like, I almost feel like I'm dry brushing. But it's heavy enough to where the paint will come off on the model, but it's not, I'm not like pushing down. But what I'll do is I'll start putting the paint on, and then you'll notice the back of my brush goes like this. And see how I've pushed it down? I'm actually using the back of the brush as a scrubber. So if I keep my paint in the same spot and I just scrub back and forth, I'll actually feather that edge. So I can start my blend before I even get the other color in. So I can, not only am I running out of paint, but I'm also forcing it to run out as well.
Cool.
So this is one of those things where it, like, some people pick it up like just immediately, and then but for most people it takes a little bit of practice, right? And then we're talking, you get to a miniature where it's super teeny tiny area. Like I did this blend on this base. That's a huge blend. I don't have anywhere, even on the cape, is not as big as that blend's going to be. So, you know, it is what it is. You're going to have much smaller areas, and sometimes it's a little bit easier. Sometimes it's a little bit harder. You know, it just depends. So any questions on that so far? Like, let me see your base again.
Okay.
All right. So you got paint on there. I wouldn't really call that a blend, but it's a start.
Yeah, sure.
And the funny thing is, like, a lot of people think when you're doing a wet blend or whatever that the blend has to be absolutely perfect, and that is not the case at all. In fact, you almost want lots of little micro blends within the blend to look more natural. Also, if the blend is a little bit choppy, sometimes that's the start of my texture for the piece or something. So I always use, even little mistakes like that, I use them to my advantage, you know, to work out. Now, the key here is just practice, doing it over and over and over again. One thing, that base is massive.
Yeah.
Maybe grab like even a smaller base or something, but also you can practice on the actual miniature that you had to practice on. Let me show you real quick. I just finished up a commission where I utilized wet blending quite a bit. Actually, these figures were the ones that I started on back in the very first teaching class. I painted the cloak, the coat that he has, that sort of teal and dark blue. That was a wet blend. It started out as a wet blend. Now, granted, I modify everything with airbrush and I, you know, finish highlighting and stuff, but the initial base coats were all wet blended, the faces, everything, you know, and these are just gaming figures. They really shouldn't be blended at all, but they are because of the way I base coat, you know. I've also got a couple of these other ones. These guys came out really cool, and you can get really, the thing I like about wet blending is you can go really dark to really bright all at once, you know, so you can get really vibrant colors and stuff. This was one of the guys that I showed you and Adam before we started this, Chaos Space Marines. And so his armor, I started off with the airbrush, but all the gold is all wet blended. So little things like that, it's super fun to do, and it's very quick. You know, it allows you time to do all the other fun stuff like OSL, glowing, and you know, adding extra details and stuff once you've been going. So that being said, let me tell you kind of my ideas for when you're putting that color on. So we've both got like sort of a zenithally primed model, and a zenithal prime, for those of you watching that don't know, is it's primed black and then it's primed white from above. So basically you kind of get the idea of where the lights and shadows should be. It's a general idea of how the model should look when you're done. So when I'm wet blending on this, I use that zenithal prime as my guide. Whenever I base coat models, it's my midtone and my shadow color, and that's it. I don't really worry about my highlights or anything like that. I'm just doing the generalized color. So I want a midtone and a shadow. That's it. And so the cool thing is even though you're covering up the zenithal prime, where it's white, that color will be a little bit lighter, and where it's dark, whatever color you put over it will be a little bit darker. So the zenithal lighting still does help you in the long run. Now, if you don't have zenithal priming, you have to guess where all those highlights and shadows are. But that, you know, that can be done as well. So when I'm doing something like this cape right here, I go for what's called the general vision. So instead of going and saying, okay, I need to put a dark, like, let's say I'm doing this cape in like a teal color. So I'm going to do bright teal down to a darker teal, right? Um, I'm not going to follow everything single shadow here and put dark teal here, dark teal here, dark teal there, and then light teal only where the white parts are, and then some sort of weird mixture of the dark and light for the gray. Basically, I break it up into smaller, into like generalized sections. So I know it's lighter up here, and it's darker generally down here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to paint it all dark down here, all light up there. And then once I've got that, I can always come back and highlight brighter down here where I know I had a highlight there and stuff like that. So it's like dumbing it down.
Yeah.
And I find that you get a lot better, more natural lighting if you do it this way. If you try to go in and make all those shadows right away, it's really tough. Adam totally cheats this system by using the contrast paints. And he just puts it on, and the zenithal prime shows through really well. But this will give you an option. You can, like, he actually, we didn't know if you could actually wet blend contrast paints because they're very wet, but we actually did it in the last, or he did it in the last session, so it worked, But I'm going to show you how to do it with real paints, and then you can always change it up. I mean, you could base coat with inks, you could base coat with anything you wanted, but so another thing with that wet blending, I don't know if you noticed, when I was painting this base, I'm always pulling back towards my body. So I always want my brush to be moving back towards my stomach.
Okay.
To do the next color, like if I'm painting the shadow color, I obviously went this way because I ran out of paint going towards the light color. So I got to turn the model around and then pull it back this way. So I'm constantly turning the model to whichever way I need to pull the paint back to me. And that's important because I've seen people try to wet blend going away from themselves, and it's really hard to do. It's just confusing, The other thing is, you may have noticed too, and I even mentioned it, I never pick my brush up. Once I put it down, I move it back and forth. I get the blend going the way I want it to. When I'm finished with my brush stroke, I don't pick it up in the middle because I'll leave a mark there. I try to find an exit strategy off the model. So if I'm doing this guy's sword, and let's say, like, look at the zenithal prime, it's a little darker down here, it's brighter up here. So I would do a darker color down here, pull it back towards me. When I get about halfway, I want to get off that model because I don't want the darkness going all the way up. So I'll figure out a way to either come off this way or come off this way. Like I find an exit strategy, turn it around, I do the highlight, and it would probably go off that way. So I never just pick up my brush. So I'm going to do that on this cape and kind of show you the general vision and also my exit strategy to get away from here. So there's so many things to think about. I'm glad we're recording this because it's hard to remember all of them. And even when I'm teaching, I'm like, oh yeah, there's this other thing. It's super important. So some colors, when you're blending, and if you've never blended before, you'll have no clue about this. But as you're blending, some colors take over the other color very quickly. So maybe on my palette, like I've got a dark teal here, which is coal black, and then I have eldritch teal, which they're both P3 colors. Then let's just say for the fun of it, eldritch teal is way more powerful and will take over the dark teal way quicker. So what will happen is when I'm painting that highlight color, it will just be a highlight and it just starts obliterating all my shadows. Like it just takes over. So if I see that happening, I make a mental note of it, and the next time I paint that color or those two colors in combination, I put way less of the eldritch because I know that it will, even with way less, it still takes over a lot of the darker color. So little things like that are good to remember. That's why I always say watch your paint dry, see what happens, pay attention because it will help you in the long run. And once you start understanding and can sort of anticipate these things happening, it makes painting so much quicker and so much less frustrating. Cool. So I'm going to do the dark teal kind of like about halfway up. And then this is a very light cape, so I'm going to bring that lighter teal and try to bring it down a little bit further. So I might actually go into the dark teal a little bit more. So it doesn't really matter if you start with your dark color first or your light color first. Again, sometimes if one takes over the other more than it should, I usually do that one second. But so I'll do this, but I don't know how these colors are going to react. So I'm going to start with the dark teal, and down here in the darkness, it's all dark teal. Like I don't have to worry about blending at all. And then I'm just going to come over. I'm going to go up into that highlight area, and you can already see some of the benefits of having those thicker colors. They just cover really, really well. Like it would probably be just one hit on this and I'm good. So this is a big area of darkness, so I'm just keep adding to my brush a little bit more. Right
And
about there I think is good. What's that?
You're putting paint on. I notice you're like putting paint just on the tip.
Yeah, just on the tip, because this isn't as big as my base, and I know I don't want to put too much. So now I'm gonna go the other way. See, I got that really light. So it looks green in my camera. I swear to God, it's teal. I don't know why, but my camera turns this particular color into lime green. Ran out of paint too soon, so I'm gonna put a little bit more on. Come up in through here. When I hit that coal black, I just kind of keep massaging it and working it together.
Wow.
Now you see, it's not a perfect blend, but I don't care. It's perfect enough for what we're doing. So now I'll do this top part right here. The other thing I like about these hobby brushes is you can if you got to, you can mash it in there, and you're not worried about messing up the tip of your brush. So once I've got it into there, the colors in my brush have now started mixing, so it's like a hybrid of the two colors. So I'm going to see if that will go over some of this shadow color right here and bring that highlight back up. It did a little bit. I think that's good enough. I can always layer in more highlights and stuff. Okay, so I need to put a little bit. There's a fold right up here. Anyways, that was really quick. Base coat. I'm going to do... So the front side of his cape, let me wash out my brush. Now here's another thing to remember. I used to do this, and I'd wash my brush out between colors sometimes, and then I would be like, my paint's really wet, like it's really thinned out. If you don't crimp your brush with your towel, it holds on to a lot of moisture, a lot more than you think. So I really get my brush dry before I jump back in and grab more paint. So I'm going to grab some more of this coal black, start from the bottom, and work up the front side here. It's very dark all the way up, so I'm going to go almost to the top. Now some areas, they're so small, you can't do the little circles or anything. You just kind of got to fake it. And then at the top, I have too much paint on my brush, so I'm going to wipe it off and then continue on into my blend. There. So that's another thing I'm really good at. When I put the paint on the model, I know if there's too much paint or too little. I don't always know if there's too little, because sometimes you just find that out because you start painting and it runs out, and you're like, oh, yeah. I needed more. But that's okay to add more. In this case, I put that first blob of teal on, and it was like, okay, if I keep going, it's going to be teal all the way down to the bottom, and I want it to be dark almost all the way to the top. So I quickly just rubbed off on my finger and then continued with what was left on the model. So that's one of those things that you kind of learn over time. That doesn't come, well, I mean, some people it may come naturally for. It didn't for me, that's for sure.
Sure.
So like on this part right here, this is a little bit different. So our it's darker close to his body, and it gets lighter out further, and it's actually not very dark down here, whereas down over here it was almost black. So I'm just going to follow that again. So this time I'll put my general vision of the darkness will be right next to his body. I'm just going to cram it in there because this is a really hard area to get my brush into. Just kind of cram it in there like that. And then whatever's left, I'll kind of wrap over that top area, and then I'll grab my teal and start it up high. And I'm not touching very hard, because as soon as I push with my brush, it starts blending with whatever color, the remnants of that dark teal in the brush. So not only is it blending with the color on the model, but it's blending with the color within my brush.
Yeah.
So see how that went on? So
Yeah.
now I can again maybe just grab a little bit of that teal, and while all this is still wet, I'll add a little bit of a highlight on that piece.
Wow, that's so cool.
Good enough for a base coat. Obviously, you can go as long as you want re-highlighting things and cleaning up the blends and stuff, but this is like really fast, and it's a really good way to get a model base coated really quickly and see what it will actually look like. So I know what you're thinking. You're wondering, what about little teeny tiny parts? So if I'm doing like, say, belts, obviously I'm going to grab one of my better brushes because I need a little bit more control, but he's got all these belts right here. So I've found that belts, hold on, let me get a drink of water.
Sure.
Before I die.
Yeah, that's like incredible watching it go from that light to dark. The blend really does make a big difference in that.
Yeah, the blend, it's pretty amazing. I mean, sometimes, like I said, sometimes I do it and it's just like, wow, this is a hot mess. But usually it works pretty good. So I absolutely love wet blending. I mean, people talk about airbrushing being cheating, which it really isn't, because it's really hard to get good at. You know, like you have to spend a lot of time getting it right. But wet blending, I think, is full on cheating. Like, it is just so stinking easy once you learn it. And what it does is it allows you to get like the base coats on really quick, and you already have a model that looks pretty cool. So if you were just like, I'm done at the base coat stage, you could be done. But like for me, okay, I get the base coat on. Maybe it takes me like on a display miniature, it'll take me about 2 hours to get a good base coat on, because I do take a little bit more time with it. But then after that, if I'm figuring I'm going to spend 25 hours on this model, I got the next 23 hours to make it look unbelievable. And that's a lot of time, you know. Whereas in the past, I would spend 20 hours getting the base coat on, you know, like just layering up slowly, and it was just never, the lighting was never right and stuff like that. But so yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, it's really cool doing it this way because it's just quick. So on this belt here, I'm going to use Rhinox Hide and Mournfang Brown. So Rhinox Hide is a very dark brown. It's this color right here on my palette. And then the Mournfang Brown is a very orangey brown. So I'm going to start with the dark brown. And I always do the sides of a figure a little bit darker than the front. So that being said, his belts would be really, really this dark brown back here. I'll do 2 because I'm fast, but usually I recommend just doing 1. So I put that on. And with this one, it doesn't really matter the whole running out of paint thing. You're dealing with such a small area. Just touching the 2 colors together blends them.
Yeah.
So now I'll
put... Oh my god, that's so subtle but so effective.
Yes. So put that one on right there. So it just, the orange in that brown makes you be able to see it really well. And then it just goes really dark around the corner. So I'm going to do the same thing for the front here. Move this over. I mean, on a gaming piece, I would base coat it. I'd put a edge highlight on the top and the bottom of the belt so it looks like it's worn, and I'd be done. Like nothing else. It's just so fast. Mm-hmm. Just like that. And I'm going to grab a little bit of the darker brown. I'll do this other belt coming up the side. So obviously, if this was a real world application, I would have painted his tunic first because it'll be really hard to wet blend that. I mean, basically I'll wet blend right over all the brown that I'm doing right now. But just to show you how quick and easy it is. So you're relatively new to painting. So when you're picking colors for an army, it pays, like for your main colors, it pays to have a very vibrant color. So let me grab my color wheel here. I'll show you very saturated color. So if you notice on this color wheel, if we look at the the outside edge of the color wheel, not where it's whitish, but these colors out here, the very last, second to last row,
What?
those are all like pure. Those are purely those colors. Obviously, they're like the yellow's mixed in with a little bit of red here to make an orangey yellow, but this is a very saturated color. So if you choose your main colors for your paint scheme to be more saturated like this, they're going to show up really, really well. Perfect example, look at the Knights of the Game table. Look at our game mats right here, our painting mats. The red just, it pops, it takes over, because it is the most vibrant color on this mat. The orange could technically be called more vibrant, but it's a little bit desaturated. That red is the most saturated color, and it's a big spot. So it's really funny when you start gaming like this guy right here, the red shows up really, really good. And it shows up with really bad lighting. And that's what I want when I'm painting a model. Like these guys are really dark, but I wanted his OSL really bright. So I actually started with a little bit more yellow in it, but then I went back for more magenta because it was more vibrant. So little things like that, if you're smart about it in your color selection, you can make, like these guys, I made their heads really, really pink. And it just pops. It's okay to have other dark colors around it, but even like his cape, I put the highlight areas are really, really bright teal.
So do you pick that like saturated color first and then base?
I usually do. Yeah, unless like it's like Space Wolves and you're supposed to use these desaturated grays. But this color right here is very saturated. Like it's got a lot of blue in it. Yeah. And another funny thing is when you're taking photographs, blue always photographs better. That's why you see like a lot of Golden Demon, like Slayer swords, or Space Wolf models and stuff, because it's an easy color to get looking really good. But I think the key to this color, like if it was more desaturated, if it was grayer, like white and black and just a little blue, it wouldn't look nearly as good. But since this has so much blue in it, it just really shows up. So when I'm choosing colors, like these guys, I knew were bad guys, and I knew I wanted the heads kind of pink, and I wanted teal because that would go with the pink or the magenta. But I knew that the heads were going to be really, really bright, and so I didn't want the teal to be as bright, but I still chose a very vibrant teal color just so it would show up in all that darkness. Same with like on the Chaos Space Marines, I chose a very yellowy gold, because it shows up really good. It shows up in the dark. So I use little things like that to my advantage when I'm painting, when I'm choosing colors. This guy's purple cloak, I went really like violet almost color, like magenta-y violet for the highlights in it, but it goes really deep dark purple, right? But that front just pops, and then I use the same sort of yellowish gold, and then the yellowish gold really shows up, and then I got really dark shadows, so it drives those shadows deeper and everything. So it's just one of those things that whenever I look at a model and I'm like, it just isn't showing up very well, I add saturation. So let's say complicated thing, like this would be easy. Teal, we'll just add a more saturated teal color, That's simple. But what if this was olive? Olive is like that, olive drab, like the military. It's like dull, desaturated green. It's got a lot of orange in it, actually. So what I do is I put little hints, and I don't have the bottle with me, but so if I've got this olivey color is right down in here, and you see as it starts moving towards like the yellows and reds, it gets more and more olivey like that. So to highlight that, I would use one of these colors of green, which doesn't make any sense in the world. Like if you just put that color over olive, it will look stupid. But if you mix that color into olive just a little bit, the amount of saturation in that color makes the olive look brighter.
Yeah, it like flushes it up the wheel.
It exactly. And so your highlights and everything will look much more visible, but it still doesn't read as that color. It reads as olive. It's just brighter. So I use little tricks like that all the time. Like red, instead of going, like actually red's a funny one. So usually red, I just play with pushing my shadows deeper around it. So actually, let me grab one of my other figures real quick. Hold on just a second.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, this is really good. And that's like so helpful seeing how the saturation plays into that in terms of taking it from one to the other.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So these are blood packed guys, and again, this was all this commission was like 1 to 3 hour paint job. So it was like it was supposed to be fast. Now, truth be told, this was one of my buddies, and the heroes I spent a little bit longer on. Because sometimes it's a perk to be a friend, you know. And he may or may not work for Games Workshop, and I was just like, I want his buddies to be jealous. But so with these guys, this is blood packed. You know, they're the Chaos Renegade Guard, and they're totally awesome. If you've read any of the books, they just kick butt. You do not want to mess with them, but they obviously can't have a red like this guy's red. This is a good guy red, basically, and this is the bad guy red. So it's much darker, it's more desaturated, and I didn't want like that orangey red color as highlighted. So instead of highlighting them at all, I just shaded more. So I actually just started pushing my shadows down deeper. And if you notice, like the sides of his helmet, like this part of his helmet right here is almost black.
Yeah.
And then it's shadowed. Some of it's very subtle, some of it's more extreme. I got some shadows in the armor and stuff, and so everything there, it makes that red start, because the red is more saturated than the desaturated area, it just makes it look more visible. And
so you started with that red and then pushed the shadows.
I pushed the shadows deeper and deeper and deeper. So, you know, and that was like probably at the very end of the paint job, I was like, okay, one more shadow. I just got to make it a little bit darker. But, you know, little tricks like that. Now, I did that with my airbrush, and I know Adam has been wanting me to do an airbrush lesson with him. And when we finally do that, I'll show ways of, like these pants and stuff were just base coated with a khaki color. And then I came back with my airbrush at the end and kind of sprayed from below and made some shadows. And I was just done. But I needed to save that time, because like on the armor, I actually highlighted it with chipped metal around everything. And so that took a little bit more time. So, you know, I robbed Peter to pay Paul, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
So when you're doing like when you're trying to be fast and efficient, if you can find ways of being really fast, you know, not adding extra highlights and stuff, that allows you time to do extra things on other things, you know. I detailed all the leather work, you know, not massively, but it's got highlights and stuff. I put the chipping on the armor, you know, and those things like make things stand out a little bit more, and they look cool. You know, these guys look like they've been fighting for a while, you know, and you know, as opposed to like this guy who doesn't have any chipping on his armor because he's never been outside the palace, you know, like.
Yeah.
Except for in the game. but you know, same thing with all this. Like I find that like with metallics wet blend almost better than anything else, because, you know, like I don't know if you noticed, but metallics are kind of bubblegummy. Like they're always like really thick and they're hard to paint with. So I use that to my advantage in wet blending. So like I've got a couple colors here from Scale 75, which by the way I think are the best metallics out there on the market. So I'll put some of this dark shadow color up here, and then I'll just immediately grab my highlight color, which is this elven color, and I have too much paint, so I'll wipe it off, and then move this right back into that shadow color right there.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it's just blended right into there. I can then go the other way, so I'll grab the front of this shoulder pad right here, move it this way, like about a little more than halfway, grab my shadow color. So you notice I just never clean my brush.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, sometimes the paints mix on my brush, and that's kind of a cool effect too. So maybe at the bottom of this part, I went a 50-50 of the two colors. So I'll bring that in right here. So now I've base coated my shoulder pad, and it goes from dark to light.
Yeah.
Like
cool.
super quick.
Yeah.
So like on his Imperial Eagle, I've already done this one, but my light source on this model is coming from this side. It's coming in this way. So this side of the eagle I did with the lighter color, and this side of the eagle I did with the darker color. And now then I came back and I highlighted, areas. But the very first application was just this bright gold to the dark gold. Done.
So bright to shadow, and then
Right up to the midtone. So then if I was doing like highlights on that, I've actually got my highlight color here. It's this citrine color. I want to do that. Then I can come in and go, okay, where do I think the actual highlight would be on the shoulder pad? And on this, because of the direction of it, the light's going to all kind of run down to this section. So maybe there'll be like a little plop of really bright light right in the corner there.
Mhm.
That looks cool.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so another little tidbit of color theory. This is a very desaturated metallic gold. This is a very saturated metallic gold. It's very, very yellow. And I chose very, very yellow because I knew very, very yellow the citrine color will make that color, it will sparkle. And so when I put that desaturated color right next to the saturated color, it's just, you can see it. It's just, so, and then when you turn it, I mean, it just looks like it shines anyways because it's metallic, but it really shines. Like, it's just, wow. And then I can come in an edge highlight. You guys are getting a 2-for-1 here. This is a metallics class and and wet blending. But
Yeah, thank you. This is like incredible. I'm just like jaw dropped over here.
so then I use the side of my brush and I just very lightly run a highlight up both sides. It doesn't have to be super visible, but a little bit is good. I'll do it on this side too. So I find just a really light touch, and you'll get that little edge, and those things just kind of sparkle as you go. Now let's pretend like there's like maybe a little hiccup in the armor up here, like it got dinged. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but I think it's fun to put in extra details that aren't there. So I'm gonna add a little highlight right here, so it looks like the armor got dinged and it popped up. It looks like there's a ding right here too. So I'm gonna put one right here. So I just used a mistake in my wet blend to add a couple chips to the armor as it goes up. So now it doesn't look quite so. Now if I add more scratches over here that maybe correspond with those, it all makes more sense. So
For sure.
that's just like a real easy way of doing that. And if I come back and I'm like, you know what, I should have done just silver. I like literally we painted that in how many seconds? Yeah, it was really quick. So now I can go back and change it if I want to. Like if I feel like, okay, maybe I wanted that green now because some ultramarines have green edges to their armor, or yellow, or whatever. I just didn't want gold. Although I would want that gold because it looks fantastic and it looks really good in real life. Like that's the funny thing. This stuff looks pretty good, or it looks really good on camera, but in real life it's just amazing, because it just, the colors pop and they just really, really work. So that's metallics. Super easy, super simple. I think the hardest part with metallics is just judging where to put your highlights and shadows and stuff. Luckily, over at Miniature Monthly, we have full videos on that. So I also do private coaching, just like this one with Adam, and maybe one of these days, Adam, like I know he's doing a bunch of like guard type stuff, so maybe we can do something kind of like this guy, where I show how to really get like the colors to really pop in a very quick way. Like this guy is a gaming figure, but he looks like. He's not competition quality for sure, but he looks like he could get there. If I spend some more hours on him, smoothing out blends and just really popping it would be really cool. But I got it to this point relatively quickly, and you can too. It's just a matter of learning these techniques and stuff. And the wet blending definitely helps. So do you have any questions kind of on the wet blending?
Man,
we just kind of threw you into the fire right here.
Information I need to digest.
Yeah. So here's another one. Let's say I want to blend. I for some reason want to blend teal into this. So I'm gonna grab one of my bigger brushes. So I've got this Space Wolf, the Fenrisian gray right here. I've got the Fang over here. So I'm gonna grab Fenrisian on my brush, and then I'm gonna just dip it in a teal and then paint it that way and blend it that way. So I'm gonna grab some Fenrisian on a brush because that's the color I'm blending into, and I'm gonna grab just a little bit of teal. Now, this is a very touchy-feely thing. You don't want too much teal on there. But so I'm going to touch the model really lightly, move that around, and then when I want it to blend, I start pushing harder.
Oh my God.
And it just sort of blends out. Now this is a little bit bumpy. Here's the other thing that I do. Like if the edge isn't quite the way I want it, I just rub it off with my finger or clean my brush, and I can come back in with the clean brush and kind of try to fix that edge.
Yeah, wow.
But that way I got that. If I'm like, oh, I lost some of my Fenrisian gray, I'll bring that back in this way. So I'm just using a little bit on my brush, moving it back into that teal. And maybe I do an exit strategy off the side. But now I can start bringing that back in. If I want to turn the Fenrisian into a highlight on the Fang, I can actually just get it out onto the edge and start moving it around this way. So I don't know when you'd actually use that in a model, but I do use that all the time because sometimes like in metallics, you have like a bright highlight that goes way down into the shadow. So
Yeah.
I start that highlight way up at the top, and then I just move my brush out to the edge, and I just keep going down.
And just roll.
And
Yeah.
and just roll it around. So if you just think about it a little bit and you learn to manipulate your brush and how much pressure you're pushing on the model and stuff, you can actually start making it do what you want. I remember years ago, I used to think, I was just like, I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. Like, I don't understand why, I want the color to go on. I want it to mix. I want it to blend, and I want it to all work perfectly. And of course it didn't, because I didn't know what I was doing. But the more I got aware of brush pressure and stuff like that. Here's one that's super crazy. So I'm gonna see if this works. I haven't done this in a long time, but so I'm gonna put really dark blue down on this base. So let's say I put that color in. I'm gonna clean my brush off real quick. I'm gonna take teal, and I'm gonna put this right on top of the dark blue, but it should not blend at all. So I'm going to touch really lightly. And then where I want it to blend, I'll push harder. So I got that really light teal right at the top, and then I blend it in with the dark blue. So I actually do that on models as well, like especially on capes, like this cape right here. Maybe I have my dark shadow down below, and I'm going to grab a little bit more precision brush. I'm going to put this color right here. I'm going to put teal right over it. And what I'm hoping to have happen is maybe down low the teal will be bright. Like that, I just laid it right on top. And then as I come up, maybe wipe off a little bit of that so I don't have as much, and just press a little harder, and it blends in to my darker blue. It's a little bit wonky, the blend over there, so I'm just going to touch it a little bit. And at the end of the day, it's not always exactly perfect. You got to be okay with a little bit off. But I can come in with some glazes and tighten that up. But see, I put that really bright teal right over a really dark color.
Yeah.
And it's still really bright. Now, when it dries, it might tone down just a little bit, but I'll just put another layer over it. So now I got a really vibrant highlight right on a really dark area. Just painting one color over the other.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
So
that's insane.
another
And
little trick I use on for wet blending isn't really wet blending. I mean, the paint's wet, but it's not two colors blending into each other. So I'm taking my teal, and what I want to do is I want to reinforce how bright the teal is at the top of this cape. So I'm just going to put a little bit on my brush, just on the tip. I'm going to put it up on my on the fold here, and as I pull it down, I am intentionally hoping that the paint runs out. So since it's going right over the other teal, I don't really have to worry about it blending or leaving a brush stroke because it won't. There's not enough difference in the colors. But what it will start doing is it starts adding a lot more saturated color up at the top. And that will look like we talked about before, how saturated color shows up really well. It will show up better than the other teal because it's more opaque. So I just paint that, let the paint run out, and it just sort of turns into a blend of really, really saturated teal down to not as much. Put a little bit over here. I'm going to re-highlight this. It's still very nice and teal, but maybe I just insist on it a little bit. Just put a little bit more, and now I got that. I'm popping that highlight. If I want my teal to show up in all these little cuts and grooves at the bottom of this, I can use my saturated color because that shows up really, really well against the dark color.
Yeah.
Almost better than if I just added white to it. You'll find that like desaturated colors are very uninteresting. So when you get down in shadows, and if I was just taking this coal black and adding white to it, it would show up, but it wouldn't show up nearly as good as if I do the teal. So I do that little trick all the time. Or maybe I'll use coal black, but I'll add teal to it instead of white. So I'm manipulating the color to be more saturated in that one area.
Oh my God. Yeah, there's just so much more control with
Yeah.
how you put the colors.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's really cool and it's fun. I mean, I enjoy it because I like playing with colors. So maybe like on this, I've got that teal. I think it would look, again, I don't have any of my colors with me. I was going to say something really interesting, but it won't matter now. Let's say that I want to put some dirt in there. So perfect example. So I'm going to grab a really bad brush, hobby brush. That's one that you'd probably throw away. I keep it for just this purpose. So I'm going to
just the occasion.
Yeah, this is just the occasion to use my crappy old brush. So I'll wet it, lick it, whatever, put it in water, but get most of the water out so it's just moist. And basically what we're going to do is I'm going to put brown on the bottom of this cape to make dirt. And then I'm going to use this brush because it's clean, and I'm going to wipe it away.
Okay.
So I'm going to use that Mornfang brown. And I usually start in individual folds. So I put a big blob on, so I put too much on, and then I wipe it away. Maybe as I wipe it, I run it up the sides here. I also, because it's so messed up, I can also stipple a little bit. Maybe wipe that away. I don't want too much, so like maybe like work it like that. So that looks like dirt.
You're still like painting towards your body as you're doing all this.
Yeah, yeah. This one I definitely paint towards my body because I find that it's just easier to I can keep my control of my brush much better this way. And then I just run it around. We're going to do a little bit over here. So this brown shows up really well because it's got so much orange in it. And again, the saturated color working for me. If I used Rhinox hide, it's a reddish brown, but it's really, really dark. And if I put it on there, it's not going to show up at all. But this Mornfang brown, it just shows up. So that works out pretty good. So now I've got some dirt on the bottom of that cape. I can do the inside edge. So, going back to, I had a little hiccup in the blend right here. But if right there, I just make sure a little bit more dirt happens. Now the hiccup actually adds to the dirt. So, I've learned over time that just because you have a little mess up in your initial blend, don't be like, I have students who are, they're like me, they're super OCD. And they're like, I gotta fix that. I can't not leave it that way. And they'll sit there and mess around with it until they get frustrated, because it just doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't work. But I know now that I can leave certain things. I could have fixed that with my airbrush later too, but I don't need to because I just fixed it with dirt. I'm gonna do one more of these teal, and I'm gonna do that little. This is actually the Ben Comets type loaded brush. He's a super famous German painter, super awesome guy. Um, and he'll put a little, like the teal, he loads the brush with the teal, and then you put a little tip of a highlight color on it. And again, touch real lightly, and then I usually like wiggle a little bit. I try to just let that color blend. It's hard to see. These two colors on the camera are not playing well, but I'm gonna do it really bodacious. So there, you can see that highlight right there. You see that highlight blended right into the green because I've got that green or that teal in my brush, and highlight blends right into it. This one's a really hard technique because you really gotta have the right amount of paint in your brush, otherwise it goes badly. See, like that. You see, I'm blending back into that area that's all teal. So when I stop, I could actually take my brush off like this, and it doesn't leave a line down here because it's the exact same color.
Yeah.
But this is one of those things where it's all about that brush pressure, I think, because if you push too hard initially, it pushes the paint down and blasts it out sideways.
Mm-hmm.
You want to actually, everyone talks about these really thin layers of paint, but you can actually paint really thick paint down in a thin fashion. If I put a big blob of paint on this cloak, you would never know the difference because it's just a flat cloak. Now, if I do it on like this guy's armor, you would notice because it starts filling in detail. So, I know the parts of the model that I can put the paint on thicker, and I know the parts that I can put on, that I have to be more delicate. But I can also get, with that thicker paint, I can get opaque colors very quickly and make it look really cool. So something like that. Run this down sideways. You see I use the side of my brush a lot to kind of like erase. So it's important, sometimes you fill your brush up all the way because you're painting a big area and you need lots of paint on it. Other times I just use the very tip of the brush and I use the back of the brush as an eraser. So I'm constantly using my brush. My brush is my best friend. Wow. Don't tell my girlfriend. But my brush is what, allows me to do a lot of things very quickly, and it's also one of my biggest frustrations, so, but it's just one of those things where you kind of gotta pay attention and work at it,
Yeah, that's amazing.
So what I would do, we got this thing videotaped, at least I do. Pretty sure you guys are taping it too. Go back in, like try it, and then watch the video again because you're going to run into problems. Like if it's not blending correctly, it's usually either you're moving too quick, you're not moving towards yourself, there's too much paint, or you really shouldn't have any liquid in your paint at all. Like people always ask me, can you put extenders in it? Can you do all this stuff? And I'm like, I don't usually do that because it thins the paint. It's not technically water, but it is, Yeah. So it's just one of those things that you find that the thicker paint works. I've got the Citadel paints I find are usually on the thicker side, which is nice. P3s are the same way. Reaper has thick and thin paints, so you just kind of got to be careful which ones you're doing. The thin paints I use all the time too. I just use them. I just don't wet blend with them as much, And then as you get better at wet blending, I know people that wet blend with glazes. So it's not that you can't thin them. It's just it's way easier to do it when you're thinning them or when they're thicker, The other thing is I learned on bases. Like I couldn't get it for the longest time on a figure. Like it's also kind of scary. You're like, I want to paint this figure and I don't want to mess it up. And it's just a very scary thing to be doing, to be putting paint on the model, that way. So I started painting bases, because I would batch paint like 100 bases for a customer, and I'd always paint the back of the base a little bit darker than the front. And I used to do that. I'd paint it all the same color, and then I'd shade it and all this stuff. And then I was like, why don't I just paint the back of the base dark brown and the front of the base lighter brown, And that's when because I was doing so many bases, and because they're bases and nobody cares if the blend's good or not, I started learning. I had an opportunity to start paying attention and learn when does the blend happen good and when does the blend happen bad.
Yeah, no,
I,
I love that. Like using the bases as
the
like
test the
stepping.
test thing, yeah, exactly. And then and then it's just like baby stepping into figures, doing the belts and stuff. Super easy. It's really hard to mess up. So I started with like belts. I paint everything else normally, and I would do my belts with wet blending. But now it's like, when I'm painting a face, it's like I put shadow colors on the side and the bottom, mid-tone in the front. That's it. That's my general vision of the face. And then the face just goes together really quick after that. Like it's so it's just one of those things where, like, if you kind of methodical about it and you just practice, it pays off. It pays off big time. And when you start painting stuff faster than Adam, he'll be like super bummed. Super jealous.
Oh my god.
Although he's getting really fast, and he's like, now he's wet blending contrast paint, so it's the sky's the limit right there. But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that, go back, watch the video again, and then maybe in a future session we could come back and do like a follow up, just the things that you're getting and the things that you're not getting, because believe me, I've made all the mistakes. Like, I've seen it all happen.
Yeah.
And there's a lot. But it's just one of those things. So
Yeah, for sure. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Aaron.
cool. Right on. Well, I always have fun on these Friday paint nights with Aaron, or whatever we want to call them.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I actually look forward to it. I mean, I look forward to a lot of stuff, but this is pretty fun, and I think it's good for the community and stuff too. So we're making pretty decent content. I've never actually filmed like a student session, like so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fun. Thank you so much.
Right on. Well, cool. Well, if you don't have any other questions, then I think we're pretty much
I
good
don't.
to go.
I'm like my
Yeah,
brain
you got. There's a lot there. So watch the video again. Like, so when I actually want to make a video on how to watch videos.
That's actually a really good idea.
Everyone talks about how annoying the painter is, or how boring it was, or whatever, and I'm like I'll look at the same video and I'm like, this is fantastic, because half the time I'm not listening to the person, or I have it turned down or whatever, and I do what I do when I paint. I watch the brush strokes, I watch the paint dry, I do all those things. And perfect example is there was a Russian painter, Natalia Melnik, and she did a video for Cool Money or Not, and people were just like, were dogging it big time. I watched it and I was like, this is like liquid gold. Like, this is awesome. But I wasn't listening to there was language barrier and stuff there, but it was like, I was watching, like, when she put certain colors into other colors. It was just like, this is really cool. Like, this is neat seeing someone else do this. So, just, really pay attention to what's happening, because you'll start being able to read between the lines. Even with me, I can't tell you like every nuance, because it's really hard to articulate all that. But I can tell you all the main things, the main problems that I have. But, and then you just start developing your own version of wet blending. Like Ben Comet's loaded brush, I've never gotten down perfectly the way he does it. It's like magic when he does it. You just want to break his fingers, but I found ways that works for me. And it's a little bit different, but it works 100% of the time. So I'm like, when I get in a situation, I'm like, I'm doing loaded brush right here. I know it'll work perfectly, and it does, And so it's really neat, as you grow as a painter, knowing different techniques and stuff. Now, when you have a certain problem, you can roll through your techniques very quickly till you find the one that works for that particular model,
Yeah. What would you say, like, when I go back and watch, is, kind of starting off, what would be the next things I look for?
For like in wet blending, or just in painting in general?
Yeah, just like absorbing the lesson, I guess.
Yeah. So I would just, really just pay attention to how I put the paint on the model, kind of the way my brush was. This is the main mistakes people make. They don't pull the brush back towards themselves. I don't know why, but everyone does it the opposite way. Like, for some reason, they start painting backwards or something. It's really weird. The other thing people do is they dab. They do that. And that's how we paint, right? You're painting a figure and you just put lines of paint on that figure. I paint like this. I lay the brush on and I move it around. So if you don't have enough paint on your brush for it to move around and you have a solid color on there, then maybe you need a little bit more paint on your brush. When I lay down that first little layer of paint, like let's say I'm going from my knuckles back to my palm, when I start laying that paint on, it's super thick. Like it's almost like a bubble of paint. But I know when it dries, it will dry smooth, like perfectly smooth. You won't know how thick it is. And then as I come out from there, so I'm really light with my touch. And then as I get further back to my palm, the brush goes down like this, and I'm scrubbing. But I'm still going kind of slow. So really manipulating that paint is going to help you so much, because I've noticed the thinner the paint is right here in the middle where it's going to blend, when that other color hits it, it just blends perfectly. And you don't have to do anything else. If it's really thick right there, when the other color hits it, it starts swirling around itself. It's like a giant toilet bowl of paint, you know.
Yeah.
It's no fun at all. So the other thing is, like maybe you do a blend and it looks horrible. You're like, this is the worst blend ever. I will never show Aaron this picture, you know. I've put that blend on. Sometimes I try to fix it. Like I'll do another brush stroke over it to try to smooth it out. But sometimes it just doesn't work. So what I do is let it dry. Just let it dry completely. Do the same blend right over it. You can put that same blend over it 5, 10, 15 times, and it's not going to affect the paint job at all, because your paint's on there pretty thin. It's it's a smooth, thin layer, and oftentimes the second layer, for whatever reason, goes on perfectly. And I think it's because there's already color underneath, so if it is a little choppy, it doesn't show up as well. But when it's going over that white-black prime, sometimes you see the choppiness. So sometimes all it takes is a second go over. So a lot of times, like if I'm painting a cloak, I paint the front of it. As I'm painting the back of it, the front of it's drying, and then I look back at the front and I'm like, okay, that was a bad blend. Maybe it's a perfect blend, but your highlight's too high, or your like the shadow goes too high. So I put on a second layer and I make it so the mid-tone goes down further. I just blend it further down into the shadow. And so that second, oftentimes the second or maybe the third pass, it's perfect. But the goal is to get it perfect on the first pass, because, if you're painting 100 models and you do one coat on the cloaks, that's 100 coats. If you have to do it twice, that's 200 coats. If you have to do it 3 times, it's 300 coats. Like it just starts making the paint time go longer and longer and longer. And I think being more efficient, I look at things, the less times my paintbrush touches the model, the less opportunities I have to mess it up.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
As my old mentor, Jeremy Bonamont, used to say, he's like, just don't make mistakes. Of course, learning, you have to make mistakes to learn. So, but you just get to the point, like, we used to laugh at him, we're like, that's funny, and it's like, dude, just don't make mistakes. When I'm doing my metallics and stuff, I know where the highlights go. I just know, I know what kind of base coat I need to put on it, to set me up to be most efficient in my next steps, and like with the Space Marine shoulder pad, I knew where to put that mid-tone and the shadow, and then I knew exactly where to put the highlight to get the most bang for my buck, with the least amount of brush strokes, So that's the main thing, just really pay attention to your brush strokes, and then just practice. I know so many people, they take a lesson and they don't do anything. Myself included.
Next time, I'm going to send you a picture of this base. It's going to be like covered in attempts. So.
Sweet. That totally works. And we did dark to mid-tone, but that doesn't mean, like, when I'm painting, sometimes I do my shadow, my mid-tone, and if I'm feeling it, I just put the highlight in right away. Or like that, I put the brown in for the dirt, but maybe I wanted to put like a maroon color, just kind of gracefully flowing through the cloak. You can do all that stuff in the base coat, and it's actually faster than an airbrush, because an airbrush you'd have to change your color 3 times to get to that point. With the wet blending, you don't even need to clean your brush off, for crying out loud. You just keep going.
It's better not to.
Yeah, you just keep going,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, just pay attention. I think just paying attention to the colors, watch what you're doing, and practice.
Cool.
I think you're gonna have some good results.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to put these to use.
Cool beans. All right, man. Well, I guess we can wrap this up. Another cool Knights of the Game Table paint tutorial lesson thing. I don't know what we got to come up with a name for this. Adam.
I know. I'll have to go with Adam. He's the master at naming
Yeah.
things.
We'll figure something out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Right
Appreciate
on.
it.
I appreciate you guys too. We'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.